Ready. Good morning. Being 9 a.m., I'll call to order the McHenry County Board Committee of the Whole meeting of August 14, 2025, and Mr. Sullivan will lead us in the pledge today.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Kathy, will you please call the roll?
Carolyn Campbell. John Collins. Joseph Gottemoller. Here. Terry Greeno. Here. Eric Hendricks. Carl Kaminsky.
Present.
James Kearns.
Here.
Dina Krager.
Here.
Matthew Kunkel.
Here.
Brian Sager.
Here.
Michael Shorten.
Here.
Michael Scala.
Present.
Larry Smith.
Here.
Patrick Sullivan.
Here.
Paul Thomas.
Here.
Gloria Van Hoff.
Present.
Tracy Von Bergen.
Here.
And Chairman Bueller.
Here. Having a quorum, I'll entertain a motion to allow Dr. Sager to attend remotely. Ms. Altoff makes a motion. Ms. Greeno seconds. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Against, motion carries.
Thank you.
Good morning. I have several items to report before we begin reviewing the agenda for next Tuesday's voting meeting. As you all heard last week, County Administrator Peter Austin has decided to retire effective January 2nd. Pete, you're still stuck with us for another 4.5 months, and there will be plenty of time for goodbyes, but allow me to be the first to say thank you so much for your 20 years of running a very tight ship. We like to say that McHenry County is the most efficient and effective county government in the state. I'm not speaking out of turn when I say that we have you to thank for much of that. On Thursday, August 7th, Pete and I once again had the pleasure of congratulating the high school interns who completed the Manufacturing Pathway Consortium's summer internship program. The program, one of the first we funded through the Advanced McHenry County program, is in its 4th year and is not only still going strong, but is getting better with each passing summer. Thank you to the students, the event's gracious hosts at McHenry County College, and to the area manufacturers who took on these paid interns to give them a taste of pursuing manufacturing careers. Thank you as well to County Board Member Carolyn Campbell for attending. As a reminder, the second installment of property taxes is due Wednesday, September 10th. Thank you to Treasurer Donna Kurtz, who successfully worked with Associated Bank to get them to accept property tax payments from any county taxpayer, regardless of whether they have an account or not. Associated Bank has branches in Crystal Lake and Richmond, which means that more taxpayers who prefer to pay in person have a closer option than driving to the Treasurer's office in Woodstock. And as a reminder, a number of McHenry County banks accept property tax payments from customers with accounts, and a list can be found on the Treasurer's website. Congratulations to Regional Superintendent Diana Hartman and the Regional Office of Education for holding the ROE's first ever all-district conference on Tuesday, July 29th. More than 230 people from school districts throughout our educational service region attended the free professional development day that focused on teaching, learning, and safety. Thank you to McHenry High School District 156 for graciously hosting the event. And finally, this morning, the 8th annual McHenry County Water Forum will take place from 5:30 to 8 p.m. next Wednesday, September 10th at the McHenry County College Lutz Auditorium. This year's theme focuses on watersheds, and speakers include Baxter and Woodman Senior Environmental Planner Cecily Kuntz, Village of Algonquin Chief Ecologist Brad Anderson, and Village of Algonquin Assistant Director of Public Works Michelle Zimmerman. The annual event is put on by our Water Resources Division in partnership with the Environmental Defenders of McHenry County and numerous other sponsors. They have once again extended an invitation to me to give opening remarks, and if the subject of protecting our water interests you, I encourage you to attend and get a comprehensive and interesting education about McHenry County's water supply and the need to preserve it. And that concludes my remarks, and as a reminder, we do have need for an executive session this morning to discuss personnel matters. Do any members have comments this morning? Seeing none, do we have public comment this morning?
No, sir.
No public comment. Okay, reports and presentations. Oh, there's one. Okay. As we get our names, just a reminder, the public comment is your opportunity to address the board. You'll have 3 minutes in which to do so, at which time the red light will come on in front of me, and I would ask you to summarize your comments if you haven't already. Jody Whitaker? Whitaker?
Go ahead. Okay. Good morning, McHenry County officials. My name is Jody Whitaker, and I am the campaign's director for Showing Animals Respect and Kindness, SHARK for short. I have sent many, if not all of you, multiple emails since May, and I have left 2 voicemails for Mr. Adam Wallen, the Director of Planning and Development, and I've also spoke to him on May 1st. As you know, in order for a steer-tailing rodeo to take place, a veterinarian, an EMT, and security is required. Back in July, on July 12th, there was an event in Marengo. There was no permit issued, there was no veterinarian in attendance, nor EMT, nor security. At this event on July 12th, animals were electrocuted. Electrocuting animals is illegal in Illinois. It violates the Illinois Humane Care for Animals Act. In another point in our footage that we documented, a man picks up a piece of wood and he was hitting animals in the face with it. He was hitting them on the head with it. He was poking them with this piece of wood. Beating animals is illegal in Illinois. Horses were hit in the face. They were hit on top of their head. They moved. They were gestured. They were in fear. They're prey animals. This constitutes torment. Torment is illegal in Illinois. This July event in Marengo had none of the required, the necessary ingredients to put on an event. And then we come to this Saturday. There's an event scheduled right here in Woodstock. My colleague went to a sanctioned rodeo in June. The animals had shelter from the sun, from the heat. The Illinois Department of Agriculture requires shelter and protection for animals, but the Illinois Department of Agriculture does not enforce this law. They will not be there on Saturday. They never go to these events. They sent us an email stating that they do not pursue criminal activity. That's up to local law enforcement and state's attorneys. And then the applicant for this Saturday put on their application a veterinarian who told us that she reached out to your county weeks ago and said she will not be participating with these animal abusers. So as of right now, the applicant for this Saturday has no veterinarian. But even if he manages to find a veterinarian, and in 2 recent cases, the veterinarian came from Wisconsin. In one case, they didn't have an Illinois license to practice veterinary care. That too is illegal in Illinois. But these events are having trouble finding veterinarians who are willing to partner with them because the entire act of steer-tailing involves a man chasing a prey animal down the side of a rail, grabs them violently by their tail, which ends up many times degloving the animal, which is where the tail is ripped off their body. The hair and the skin is ripped off the bone. This is very painful to these animals as they have a lot of nerve endings in their tails. They are violently pushed to the ground.
You could summarize your comments, please.
Sure, okay. So I am just urging you, as I have in my emails and my voicemails, to please deny this permit for Saturday and any future permits for steer-tailing. There's no way to put on these events without violating Illinois law. And they are very different from sanctioned rodeos where they have veterinarians, where animals are only run once. My organization goes out, we document this cruelty, we urge officials to stop it, and animals are paying the ultimate price. So again, I urge you to deny the permit for Saturday and any future steer-tailing permits. Thank you for your time and consideration today.
Helen Wiedeker?
Hello. I've never done this before, so thank you for letting me speak. I support my daughter and her organization, and I would like you to deny this permit for this Saturday's so-called rodeo entertainment. If anybody's ever seen the footage, it's horrible. And children come to these events and they see this cruelty to animals that I can't imagine how parents can even bring their children to it. But that's beside the point. It's against the law. So please deny the permit for this rodeo, so-called rodeo. Thank you.
That concludes our public comment. Next, we have reports and presentations, a 3-year financial model presented by Carrie Weiss, our CFO.
Can I, maybe as our screen comes down and Carrie and Mike take their position, I would just make a couple notes. You have at your desk kind of a sheet prepared. We in our internal services meeting on Monday, which is kind of our departments that serve other departments, this was last Friday, I guess, not Monday. We're kind of brainstorming about what are some of our common core county costs that really don't change, you know, whether on some of the fringe services we're providing or whether our head count is up or down, but these are just steady costs. And kind of I documented a few of those costs just before the pandemic in fiscal 19, and then what we're looking at this current year. And you can see some pretty dramatic increases there. And these are costs we can't control, but they're costs that we're definitely bearing. And I think that kind of that frame, that backdrop that maybe we can listen to Carrie today and Mike. And I also note that they're at the bottom of that sheet, what our levy was before the pandemic and what our levy was last year or this year. So just kind of keep that in mind. I think you guys should all be very, very proud of what we accomplished in terms of controlling property tax growth and the fiscal stewardship you've provided. It's been wonderful. So, Carrie?
Okay, thank you. So this first slide should look familiar. It's the same exact slide that I used in the January or the June presentation where we kind of kicked off the budget. And also we've kind of been reinforcing it at each of the committee meetings. But you know, just to kind of keep learning, there's a lot of different terms used in government accounting. So I'll go through these quick. You know, if you have questions, please stop me because it's really a foundation to the things that we're going to be talking about. So there's different types of funds. The ones we're going to focus on right now are governmental funds, and these are used to account for government activities. So we have them divided into the general fund and the special revenue funds. So the general fund is our largest operating fund, and it's really used to cover the day-to-day operations of the county. And it's, you know, we talk a lot about the general fund, even though it's about 40% of our total budget. And that's because it has the most amount of unrestricted revenue. So really the most decision points when we're talking about budgets and tax levies and things like that. So the special revenue funds, they are set aside for specific purpose. So they have a specific source of revenue that's restricted for a specific purpose. And the reason, you know, we have the picture of them being siloed, but also, you know, we've been talking about in committees, kind of understanding how the funds interact with each other. You know, we account for them separately, we keep things separately, but what happens in one fund could have an impact on other funds, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. So, general fund, you know, we again, talk about it a lot, but what does that really mean? When I say it's the county's largest operating fund,
these are all the departments that roll up into the general fund. So the general operations for the support departments like HR and county administration, to the large operations for sheriff, health department, state's attorney. I think this is a good visual. We say general fund is just one fund, but really what does that mean? All the variables, what goes into it? So special revenue funds, the county has 43 special revenue funds. And again, they're siloed. We account for them separately. What goes into them is restricted for use. But we're going to talk in a few minutes specifically about FICA and IMRF. Those are two of the county's special revenue funds. And really kind of highlight what's happening in those funds and how that impacts what's happening with the general fund as we plan for the future. And then lastly, we have two enterprise funds, Valley High and ETSB. So enterprise funds are really, they function and we account for them like you would a business. They have revenue that supports the expenses. We're not going to talk too much about these today, but if you guys have questions about them, let me know. So right now, and we still have another round of committees. We haven't seen all the budgets. So kind of keep that in mind as we're going through this whole presentation. But this is where we're at today. And this is the proposed levy based on what we've talked about in some of the other departments where their revenue source is also from the levy. And so if you remember, we have the total aggregate extension, and we take that extension and we divide it up into the different levies. And so some of these levies, specifically IMRF, FICA, VAC, the property tax is their only source of revenue. So I think we have to sometimes look at those differently. And again, circling back to what's happening in those funds versus how that impacts the general fund. So for example, right now, based on how it's proposed, the general fund portion of the property tax is at 60.2%. So if you remember from June, we had a similar pie chart, but it was for the FY25 budget. And the general fund amount for that was 61.6. So even though we're proposing a larger pie for an increase to the extension, because of the needs of the other funds that aren't keeping pace with expenses, the general fund is going to receive a smaller percent of that. Does that make sense? Do you have a question? Okay. So again, we're not through all the departments, but this is where we're at now. So just for the general fund, this is the source. These are the revenue sources that support the activities for the general fund. So again, we talk a lot about property tax, but there is other sources of revenue for this fund. So that's why it typically becomes the fund where it kind of gets what's left over after we look at the needs of the special revenue funds. And so the property tax from the FY25 percentage of general fund revenue was 37.38, and this is actually 38.26. So again, the general fund is receiving a smaller percentage of the levy, but as some other things shift, and we'll talk about that when we get to the model, is a slightly higher reliance on the property tax. So that kind of gets us into some harder decisions as we look out into the future. Okay, so now to expand a little, and these are on your desk if this is hard to see, on what Pete started with inflation. So, inflation is something I think we've all been dealing with for several years, and what this chart shows is the orange line is the amount of CPI that is allowed under PTEL for each of the years. And the blue line is the levy percent change year over year. So, and PTEL is capped at 5, but inflation for these 2 years was in the 7s. And so really what I want to kind of highlight, and not all be bad news, is focusing on this area right here, between 22 and 25, the difference between the blue and the orange in total for those years is almost $8 million. So, we say in periods of high inflation, even if you leave your budget flat, that's still a reduction. And I think that's really highlighted by some of, just the few things on that list that show, we have to make cuts in other places in order to keep our budget flat or reduce in order to cover the increased prices, on things that you see on that sheet. Good. Any questions? So this is really saying the same thing as the prior slide. It's just, I think, my new favorite chart. So the yellow is the amount that the county actually levied, the total extension. This number at the top is the amount that's allowed under PTEL. So the blue is the difference between what we did levy and what we could have levied. And so over these years, the blue is just under 65 million. So I think what this really shows is, the way that you guys approach budgeting is not saying what's the maximum revenue we can take and then find expenses to spend that money. It's looking at what's needed, where we're currently at, what's approved, what contracts we're in, and what revenue we have to meet those needs. Okay, the model. I can tell you guys are excited for this one. So before we get into the general fund, as I said earlier, we really have to look at the impact of some of these special revenue funds when we're talking about the needs of the general fund. So we're going to highlight today FICA and IMRF. So just to remind you, FICA and IMRF are special revenue funds, and they pay the payroll liability of FICA and IMRF for general fund employees only. So the special revenue funds pay the FICA and IMRF for their employees in those special funds. So that's back to being in the silos. So keep in mind, when you make decisions about general fund personnel, it also directly impacts these funds. So both of these special revenue funds rely solely on property tax and the interest that we get from the money in those bank accounts from the property tax. Distribution is in June and September, so we really have to be mindful about the months of reserve in these two funds because it only gets money twice a year. So come May, if we don't have 6 months of reserve, then we start to get into issues of funding those last few payrolls until we get the June distribution. Right now, FICA currently owes the general fund just over $3.4 million because it's not been a strong, it hasn't been keeping up with the increases in personnel. So that fund balance is negative, and IMRF is, I think next year by June, IMRF will most likely also be negative. But again, talking about these funds use the safety net, the general fund is a safety net because we have to pay these payroll liabilities. So just keeping that in mind as we get to discussions about the general fund. Yes.
Your microphone.
Sorry. Do we pay back? Does IMRF and FICA, when they borrow that money from general operating, do we reimburse the general fund or general operating fund when we get the monies in those two accounts? And what happens at the end of the year when we're still in a deficit position?
So FICA is the only one right now that's in a deficit. So starting in FY23 was the first year in May that FICA could not meet payroll. So the general fund did a short-term loan to FICA to meet the payroll burden for May. And then when the when the property tax came in June, it was able to repay it. But starting in 24, there was not enough money in the fund to make a repayment by the end of the fiscal year. So if you remember, I brought forward a resolution because the way we have to account for it, it technically becomes an advance. And we had figured about a 3-year payback. You know, so when you ask if we have to pay it back, I mean, I guess you guys could have an action that says, just keep it. But otherwise, if there's no board action, then we have to pay it back within the time that we set forward in that resolution. And IMRF, I think next year, you know, our IMRF rate is going up slightly, and that fund, I think it will be close in May, but it will most likely have money to pay it back once we get the property tax. But if it stays on the path it's on now, which we'll look at, you know, then we'll get into a similar situation that we are with FICA. Okay, I'm sorry. This is probably gonna be very hard to see. So this is not in your packet. I'm sorry. I will send this out. But what this shows, so this is the FICA fund. So it's really just a model for this special revenue fund. Let me see. So as I said earlier, the only source of revenue for FICA is property taxes and then the interest that we earn from the money in that bank account. And the only expense is the employer portion of FICA. So here's where we got into the deficit. And then this calculation down here. So this is the actual fund reserve. And then this is where we calculate down below the months of reserve. Because as I said, really the goal for this fund is to be at 6 months. And then this is where we're at for budget and where I'm projecting it to be at the end of this year. And then the proposed amount for the FY26 budget. So right, just to start, if you look at the increase in the levy for this fund, so this is coming out of that total aggregate extension. So this is where I'm talking about where it starts to have impacts on kind of what's left over for the general fund. So for the assumptions, I use the same assumption for the general fund, a 2.5% increase in personnel, which I think maybe a little overly optimistic, but that's the number we tried to use throughout as consistent for personnel or CPI increases.
Mr. Shorten, did you have a question?
Yeah, just a quick clarification. So is the FICA an IMRF that has to be paid out of property taxes? Is that for all positions, including those funded by other sources, grants, funding that comes from the state? Is all those positions FICA and IMRF?
So these particular funds are only general fund positions.
Okay.
The grant question, some grants support benefits and some do not.
Okay.
So if it's a general fund position that has grant funding, I would say the majority, I think in the health department, they're fully covered by the grant, but the rest of them, the grant usually just covers salary.
Okay. So additional positions that would expect to be expiring or funded from another source beginning in fiscal year 2027, right now, we're potentially covering FICA and IMRF costs.
Well, I guess it depends when you say expiring, because we have a lot of grants that cover the expense for our mandated services.
And I should clarify, I was speaking specifically to ARPA funded positions.
So ARPA is a special revenue fund. So everything that we're funding, including personnel through ARPA, the FICA and IMRF is in the ARPA fund.
Oh, okay, thank you.
So if those positions, if you guys choose to move those positions from ARPA to the general fund, then that would become a liability to these funds.
Okay, understood, thank you.
Mr. Kearns?
I just want to clarify in the back, to clarify my thinking here. So I want to ask a question on all your proposals on the charts here, the levy CPI you're proposing is the maximum we can take of the 2.9%. Is that what our maximum we could actually take?
Correct. All the assumptions are on a 2.9, taking the CPI of 2.9.
And so these numbers, at 2.9%, we're still going backwards in this fund.
Correct.
And
So-
26, we're actually losing ground still.
Correct. And you know, each year, I think we have a lot of discussion. The 2.9 is what calculates the total extension. And then we have to look at that total extension and see which funds are healthy, which funds are not, specifically the ones that rely solely on property tax. And, you know, if you recall a couple years ago, the highway fund was not keeping up. So, you know, we move more money to highway fund, we move some expense out for their capital. You know, but now we have to really focus on, we've seen an increase in personnel in the general fund, and then these have just, they've been kind of hanging in, but now they're really starting to lag.
And I agree that I have a feeling the further we get into this, the worse it's going to look each year. And so I just want us all to pay real close attention to what we've done. It's just this is highly unsustainable where we're at right now.
Well, and you know, I know the terminology is taking the max of CPI, but really if you think about the tool in PTEL, using CPI, that's an inflation number. So as we saw on the graphs, as you guys see on your handouts, taking the max of CPI really just keeps us at level. It's not, you know, like we're taking a max and we're taking this huge amount of money to store. You know, I think it's a disservice for people to say, you know, we haven't been cutting taxes because, or you know, I've heard a lot of comments about, you know, cutting the fat or too much budget. And I think if you look back on this graph specifically, that organizations that are not healthy or organizations that have bloated budgets or a lot of waste, I don't think that this is sustainable. Maybe you could do it for a year, but really showing the work that this board has done in being mindful of the struggles, but also being mindful that we have a lot of, you know, we saw all the departments that need to be supported by this property tax. So this assumption does take 2.9, which is the most we can take for inflation, but I think not at least keeping ourselves level. You know, as the farther we go out, we're just continue to get into a deeper hole, because really 26 starts the not sustainable model. Sorry.
Ms. Greeno?
Yes, there's a number that I wanted to have added on here, down here on the county property tax levy. And it talked about what it was in FY 2019 versus 25, and that it was a 7% reduction. What's not included here is the amount that was transferred to other taxes for the mental health board, for transportation, the fuel. We need those numbers too, because that's the impact to the taxpayer. So to not have it on here is kind of creating the illusion that that's not correct, you know, for the taxpayer in McHenry County. So do we have those numbers? I mean, we know it's 11 million for the mental health board. What was the other? Was it the motor fuel tax that was transferred from transportation? Because that was before my time.
The county option
Yeah.
motor fuel tax was increased, but that really wasn't a direct, like the mental health board, it's
True.
shifting from property tax to sales tax. It was more an opportunity to use the increase
taxes.
from that
Yeah.
to help keep the levy for the highway fund
Right.
where it's at.
Right, but we need those amounts to get an accurate picture, because you're talking about from 19 to 25, and those are not included in here. And so, you know, you can't take additional taxes just because they're not in the levy, and then we all play pretend that we haven't had tax increases to the constituents. So we just have to really be able to see that number so that we know, because this says a 7% drop. Maybe it is. We don't know, because we don't know what those other numbers are if they were added back in here. I mean, not added back into the levy, but at least showed it as a separate line so that we could see the total.
I think it might be appropriate to make it as a footnote, but when it comes to truly the number that we're talking about, which is the property taxes that are being paid to the county, that is a correct reflection. So when you look at, when you look at what we did with mental health, that is now being put to tax that when you purchase goods, not all goods, but most goods, right? So you as a resident could choose to not pay that tax and go to Kane County and purchase your goods. So it's not a direct correlation. I mean, we could put it as a footnote, and same thing with the motor fuel tax. You could choose to go get fuel someplace else than in the county and pay a different tax rate. So I think when you're truly looking at property taxes and what the county is collecting from every homeowner, that's different than the side where you personally can make a decision about where you purchase stuff.
Well, true, but 310,000 people live here. So if we truly had not switched these to other taxing entities, then it would be a 7% decrease. But we did, and so we can make some type of an estimate of what the impact is on that. And I'm not saying good or bad. It's just that there are new board members here that may not realize this, and that this still has an impact during these years on the residents of McHenry County. So we have to, as a footnote is fine, but we have to acknowledge it. Otherwise, we're play pretending that it doesn't exist, and it does.
Ms. Altoff?
Yeah, I would agree with both Mr. Scala and Ms. Greeno, but we have to be careful that we're not confusing individuals when we start talking about this. I would say, Terry, if you want to talk about taxes, that most people feel we are overburdened from a tax perspective. But the point here we're trying to make is what this board has done with regard to trying to lower specifically the property tax. And even though we may have chosen to move some of the money, like the mental health specifically, we did it to alleviate the burden upon our property owners. The sales tax now that will fund mental health can be shared across a broad group of individuals who may work here and purchase things here but may not live in McHenry County. So I understand your interest in making sure we understand the overall tax burden on our residents, but this conversation is specifically focused in on what we have done to ensure that people's property tax bill gets lowered. So again, I don't want to conflate the issue of overall taxes. This is property taxes for people who own property here in McHenry County.
I would agree with Ms. Altoff with the one correction that the voters chose to move the mental health off of property taxes to a sales tax by a significant margin. Ms. Campbell?
Yes, I was wondering, Carrie, could you remind us when we did take the county highway and the motor fuel tax option and why? Because part of the reason was because what's happening right now with IMRF and FICA is what happened with the county highway fund, and it was $3 million in the hole. And so we went and made, you guys came up with an option to make that whole again, and that was the pressure that we had on the general fund, which we're facing right now. So you could explain that, and I believe what year that was in.
So,
September 23 was the vote, and it went into effect January 24?
Or July. January of 24. So you're correct. So the highway fund was in a deficit. So there was a couple different tools that we used to make that healthy. One was just a transfer of $3 million from the general fund to that fund. The second was moving the levy up to $9 million. And then the third was with the tool of the higher county option tax to move the capital expense, which wasn't, that amount was not keeping up with the needs and the increased costs for the Division of Transportation, was to move that to that fund. So I think in their presentation, they estimated that if that had not happened, the ask for the highway fund, if they still had capital in there, would be over $12 million.
Mr. Shorten?
I think going back to Member Greeno's comments, if you look at the 2019 versus the 2025, the mental health board impact, it resonates, but even if you pull it out and, you take a look at the graph that you have up there, and the fact that from 2021 to 2025, we haven't taken the PTEL, and if you dial back another 5, 6, 7, 8 years, we haven't taken it. So while we're in a challenging position now, one of the ways that we're able to do that over such a long period of time is departments have been very frugal and followed the board's direction. But at some point, it catches up. So I think that we're in a challenging point at the moment. But the long-term reality is something that we need to make sure that we understand.
The news gets better. I'm teasing.
Does it?
It really
Okay.
doesn't, no.
Okay, so before we get into the actual numbers, I had these assumptions in this a spreadsheet, and I was told that it was too much. So I broke it down. So what I looked at when I was building this model was really the high impact items. So I have them broken out here. Sorry.
You never went through the other fund. You only
Oh, IMRF.
Yeah.
Do you want to see IMRF?
Yeah, they need to see arm.
Okay, okay.
There you go. Are you sure?
There we go.
There you go.
Okay, so right below FICA, this is the IMRF fund. So as you can see, here's the fund reserve. And we're really spending it down very quickly. So that's why I said in my point of next year, come May, I'm sure we will need to loan money to this fund. So the levy has to go from this in 25 to this in 26. And again, circling back to that pie chart where we have the proposed 26 levy, and we actually have a larger pie, but a smaller piece going to the general fund. So really just reinforcing what I said earlier about looking at these special revenue funds, and even though they're siloed and they account for themselves, all on their own, is how do they interact with each other? Or even, going into the conversation about the Division of Transportation, what can we do in this fund that would help that fund? So, those are conversations that we're having all the time and always looking at. But really, when the pie is only a certain size, we're kind of running out of tools to use between the funds. So any questions on IMRF? We can see that if we do a fairly large increase to the levy, then this fund at least stays in the black, but we're still well below the 6 months reserve. Any questions or on to the general fund?
Ms. Greeno?
Oh, what would be the forecast for getting up to the 6 months reserve? Or, well, let's say 5 months, because we don't really do 6 months, so, but 5 months.
I did not forecast that out because
Okay.
well, really whatever number we need to get to that, because my projection assumes taking the full CPI in all the years going forward. So we would have to take that money from a different levy. So I was trying to be realistic in getting these funds healthy, but also realizing that the general fund also has a large amount of increasing expenses. So I think at this point, just getting them to the black is really the goal for the next few years, and then going from there. Okay, so some assumptions for the general fund. So the property tax is just, again, really, I looked at the needs of the other funds where I thought, highway is probably going to need a slight increase next year. VAC is going to need a slight increase next year. And then you saw the model increases for FICA and IMRF. So really looking at, again, what's left, because the general fund, as you remember from the previous slides, has other sources of revenue. So that's really why we always come back to what do we need for the other funds, what's left, what decisions do we need to make in the general fund. Another large source of revenue for the general fund is sales tax. And so I used a 3.5% growth, but there is a little caveat to this because due to state legislation, we are now receiving in fiscal 25 slightly less, and that's with the local use tax. So the local use tax is tax that we receive based on internet purchases. And so it was collected by the state and then reallocated based on population. So starting in January, it's reallocated, or it's sent directly to where the person making the purchase, where they lived. And so we're seeing about a 3.5% growth in our sales tax, but in fiscal 25, we're starting at about $275,000 less as a starting point because of this change in the legislation.
It's a subtle change, but it's not helping us.
Correct. And that's part of that shift too, that you saw the slight increase of the reliance on the general fund of the percent of property tax going up by a few tenths of a percent. But again, it is a shift. If it's small, and then as we pull it out forward, that's again part of our challenge. Next, in the model, I built in a 3% estimate for increase in fees for sheriff, public health, and P&D. These have been talked about high level with committee. So I know if you guys go into Questica and look, we don't have these built in. So that's the one difference with the model. That's the one difference between what you're going to see at the numbers with the model and like if you want to dig in and see more information in Questica. And we tell departments all the time, we don't budget for unknowns. These fees, I think 3%, we have to be realistic that they probably will happen, but we're not going to budget for them until they actually are studied and the board approves them. So, and then jail revenue, the current contract, or soon to be, I think they're signing it soon, between the sheriffs is through fiscal year 27. And again, there's a lot of unknowns with that, so we really just went with what we know now. And so it's through 27, and then I have it ending for the last 2 years of the model. And then in 26, I added 50% of the anticipated revenue for housing the DHS inmates. So on the expense side, as I said, with FICA and IMRF, 2.5% increase in salary, 5% increase for health insurance, a 5% increase to the large software contracts which is really, outside of personnel, these are the costs that are really increasing, for Microsoft, a lot of the security stuff, and it's hard because we don't really have a lot of control. We have a lot of Microsoft products and they dictate a lot of the pricing. Some of the utilities we talked about in admin services when Tom presented his budget. And then it's here almost. We've been talking about it for several years. The shift when ARPA funding goes away, we have to move the cost to the general fund. And so Really, the number that we have in ARPA that could shift to the general fund is over 3 million. But I think that number, there's a lot of decision points. You know, if there's a particular service you want to continue, or maybe a software that's nice to have. So what I did to be conservative, this 2.7 is not debatable. It's the Microsoft Enterprise Agreement. It's the contract for the storage of the body camera footage. It's rental agreements for the ROE and the election center. So these will be moving to the general fund in '27.
Mr. Kunkel?
Yeah, as I understand it, there's like $1.5 billion to $2 billion still due the state of Illinois for the opioid settlement too. And as I understand it, we are due some of those funds too. Is that in the?
So the opioid fund is a special revenue fund, and that's controlled by the mental health board. So all of that money is very, again, we talk about restricted revenue for a specific purpose. And the settlements have been hard to anticipate. It seems like we just get a lot of random checks, but we do see some of the agreements, but you know, they're out probably 10 years. So we have that built into that fund, but it has no impact on the general fund.
Ms. Van Hoff?
Yes, I just wanted to ask you if you could repeat the revenue that you said we're going to get from DHS, housing DHS inmates. I missed that. I just heard the tail end of what you were saying.
So I know the sheriff is working on an agreement with DHS, I know, to house inmates or detainees that are unfit for trial. And we didn't want to put the full amount of anticipated revenue because they're still working out some of the details.
Okay.
But I believe it's to house 12 detainees.
Okay. But it's going to be ongoing. Is that correct? A 3-year contract.
Yeah.
Okay. I thought you mentioned a figure that you put in there for the anticipated revenue.
She didn't mention anything, but
Okay, okay. Maybe I was wishful thinking then. Thank you.
I think we add in there like 328, yeah, which is half of what we'd be anticipating. You know, the sheriff's just dipping his toe in this as of July 1, and if we're seeing good progress towards the end of this fiscal year, we could adjust that number, but just being conservative, we're just going to put it in at half.
Okay, so lastly, the current model does not include any supplementals and only about 2.7 to fund some of the capital projects. Isn't this? Sorry, I should have printed this out. Again, I will send this to you. I'm sorry, it's so small, but this is the way we typically present the budgets, you know, for your approval, either by department at the committees or when we roll it up in total. So this is just the general fund, and it's by category. So each of these categories have many main accounts, which is the lowest level of or the highest level of detail in our general ledger. But we really present it this way, you know, because it highlights some of the key things we've been talking about. So here's our revenue, and then our expenses. Let's make it yellow. Oops. So And again, as I mentioned, where we're at right now assumes a 2.9% increase to the CPI, or the CPI, the growth allowed, plus new growth. So at that number, that gets us to a deficit of just under $3 million. And again, as I said, when we very first started this process, we talked about it in June, I didn't quite estimate enough shift to FICA and IMRF, so that's impacting it. We're seeing a lot of increase in personnel. And then, as I said earlier, those contractual agreements for the software. And then this calculation down here looks at our unrestricted revenue for the general fund, and then in months. And then this number is what a 6-month reserve is, and this number is how far below this is of the 6 months.
Ms. Altoff?
I apologize. Number one, is our personnel count now, with the increases, the numbers, full-time equivalent, is that significantly higher than it's been in the past? Give me a comparison.
I don't have the exact number. I would say the personnel has grown slightly, the number of FTEs. The biggest change we've seen is in the rate. We've, with union contracts.
With the salaries.
With the merit, yes.
Yeah, okay. And then question number 2 is, with those numbers there, where do you anticipate FICA to be at the end of our fiscal year? What's the deficit total of that million?
So FICA is in its own fund, so we would look at that
Okay,
separately.
I apologize.
Yeah. So at the end of '26, I'm projecting that FICA, really, I set the levy based on where our expenses will be, so it at least stays flat. The reserve, or the loss doesn't get bigger, but it's also, again, it's finding that balance between the total extension and which levies need it.
Right. Gotcha. Okay.
So all these numbers, I know it's a lot of numbers, in a graph form, maybe it's a little easier to see. So what this shows is the blue is the unrestricted reserve. And if you recall, this is 23, 24, and even 25, we had a high reserve due to multiple factors. And so there was really intentional planned spend down of that reserve funding one-time projects, specifically capital. And we had gotten a little bit behind in our capital. So I don't want to say that spending down the reserve is always a bad thing. I think if it's strategic and it's purposeful and it's not using one-time revenue to fund ongoing expenses. So where we're seeing this come down, I think, is a good thing. It's moving the reserve to an appropriate level, funding our capital. But when we start to get to these months, this is where it needs to start leveling off. And based on the current projection, you can see that it's not leveling off. So this orange is the 6-month reserve amount. And so when we use the 6-month reserve, I know, I think it helps a lot of people to visualize like what we need, but remember that's not a static number. So the 6-month reserve is, if we had $0 coming in starting today, how long could this fund sustain itself? So that 6-month reserve number, as our expenses increase, that number also increases. And when we see this going down, that's what's causing us to go the opposite way. And then this line up at the top is our total expenses.
So, go back to the spreadsheet.
I know, me too.
So what Carrie's pointing out is this number right here is 3 million. So that's what we're going to have to plug this year. Next year's number is almost 5 million, and 5.7 So it just keeps on getting worse. And again, assumption that she had made in her model is that we're taking new growth and CPI maximized each of these years. So this year, for 2 seconds, let's talk about this year. As a board, we're gonna have to make cuts in order to try and create a balanced budget, which is what our goal is every single year. So in committees, we've been getting presentations about each of the department's budgets, and they've all done a really good job so far about talking about required programs and I really like programs. And so, as a board, we're gonna have to start looking at the I like programs and decide which of those programs we're going to need to not do anymore, or reduce, or somehow alter those in order to close a $3 million deficit. I'm sad to say, but next year we're gonna be doing the same thing all over again, because again, we cannot generate enough revenue in order to sustain the long-term expenses that we have going forward. And, we can talk about reoccurring expenses and one-time expenses, but it's the reoccurring ones which are creating this issue. It's not the one-time expenses. So when we, as a board, make decisions about what we're doing, this is where we're talking about. If, again, we're going to get a supplemental list of things that people want. For the general fund, it's not too bad this year. It's about $1 million, roughly. So if we want to do any of those, then we're going to have to cut more in order to do some of those supplementals. Again, if those supplementals are reoccurring, that's going to compound the issue for the following years. It also, we've talked about, other, I'll say, personnel costs. There's been, resolutions that have come forward that came to finance about elected officials' salaries. Again, reoccurring expenses, so that's, again, going to compound. I know that doesn't impact next year's budget, but it will impact future year budgets. So I was asked to wear the money shirt again. I contemplated this morning in the closet wearing a red shirt because really that's kind of where we're at. But I went with the money shirt instead of the red shirt because in anticipation of us being able to make a difference and close this gap.
Ms. Altoff?
And obviously, you addressed the question that was in my mind. None of these figures include any requests from supplemental and/or the elected officials, constitutional offices for an increase in their salaries, correct?
Well, no, not because, again, she only deals with what it is, right?
Okay.
So,
and that's true then for anticipated or at least discussed availability of increasing some of our fees.
So I didn't include, like if you look in Questica in our budget and in some of the presentations, I did not include that because it's been discussed, but there hasn't been studies done.
I just want to clarify
I did
it.
include it in this.
Okay, thank you.
Because I think it's probably realistic that it will
okay.
happen, yeah.
Thank you.
So I guess where do we go from here? I guess I'd like to answer any questions about the data that you just were provided.
Mr. Shorten?
So the 2.9 million utilization of fund balance, that's anticipating that we would put through a levy that takes the full new growth as well as CPI.
Correct.
And on top of that, there's potentially, you said another $1 million in special requests?
Supplemental requests, yes.
sorry,
So departments have put forward through our committees about $1 million, or will, if they haven't come before us yet, they will be coming forward.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Campbell?
Okay, just to clarify, you had talked about the reserves, to just carry real quickly, and then I have two questions. You talked about the month of reserve. even if we don't do anything, because costs keep going up, that kind of, we lose that month, the months as we go. You mentioned something to that effect.
Yes, that's correct. Because as your expenses continue to go up, your months of reserves continue to go down because whatever your reserve, even if you keep your reserve constant, the expenses have gone up. So your month of reserves are going to go down even if you were to keep that constant.
All right, and to clarify, we do months of reserves depending on the type of fund. So yes, in general, 5 months, but some like IMRF and FICA, which rely on the payment of the property tax, we go out 6 in order to make sure that we have coverage until that payment comes in. Isn't that correct?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. And then in terms of the total amount that we account for in property taxes, again, is what, Peter?
This past year was 64.9 million.
And how much is that of the total tax bill for most property tax bills?
On average, 6.5% of the county property tax bill.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Okay, so if there's no more questions, then where do we go from here? So not all budgets have been presented to committees yet. So in the next cycle of committee meetings, you'll get the finalization of all those budgets. But again, I guess the reason why we're doing this today is because, you know, staff and I have dedicated that we're going to give you as much information as quickly as possible so that you guys are not waiting to the last second to understand what's going on. So that's why we did this today. But through the next cycle, you'll have all of their budgets finalized. So with each of those budgets, each of the departments have been bringing forward items where things could potentially be cut. So that list will be compiled from all the different departments. And then, you know, I guess I would encourage board members, if there is something else that you feel like could be cut regarding the general fund, then, you know, please share that with, you know, Pete also. So if there's something in addition to that that you think can be looked at, give that to Pete as quickly as possible so that he can start looking at that and seeing how that can impact. Again, when we looked at the general fund, as you can see, we collectively can shift dollars from different, well, not completely, but mainly from different funds in order to try and help things. So as you can see, we're shifting dollars to IMRF because of the pain that it's currently in as a fund, you know. So we have some flexibility, but again, it's really for sustainability, it's really talking about whatever's reoccurring expenses, you know. So one-time expenses, which is how we've gotten to where we are today. I mean, for those of you that have been on the board a while, we did a lot of shifting and moving and manipulating in order to try and make budgets work year over year over year. Pete calls those levers. We've been pulling the levers, you know. The problem is the levers are basically gone. There aren't any more levers. We heard in transportation about another $500,000 shift to try and help out. Well, you know, that's basically taking the last of it. So, you know, you can continue to try and manipulate things as well as you can, but really this data, when you start looking at these numbers out here, they're red, and they're going to continue to be red, and they're going to continue to get more red. So even if we were to cut, for giggles, $3 million here to have a flat budget, we're still looking at next year of cutting another $2 million of something else that we haven't cut already. So I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but it doesn't get better, it only gets worse. And so I am proud of what the board has done over the last 10 plus years as far as our fiscal responsibility, but we're now sitting in a pile that we have to deal with.
Mr. Kearns?
You know, and we can't even if we maximize the revenue, we can't cut ourselves out of this deep enough to help us. I mean,
we have to. We don't have a choice, though.
Right. But I'm saying it's going to be there's our personnel is where you're going to have to make the cuts. But one of my question is related to COVID dollars, of course, and that all ends. And we talk about Metra and all that, that we have the fiscal cliff coming on that. What is our fiscal cliff when all of that ends? How many positions have we created because of COVID that could be eliminated? I guess, do we know that, or do we have that yet?
I'll tell you, we will be having the the Health Department's presentation in a couple of weeks, and certainly Melissa and Carrie and I have talked about that. It's not as many as you think, because we have COVID dollars providing services that we need to provide. We're just helping the general fund with COVID dollars, but we will get those numbers to committee to be sure.
Yeah, I mean, these are difficult discussions to have, but we have to have them.
Yeah.
I mean, you hate to say we gotta fire somebody, but we gotta talk about it.
It's not uncommon in August to have a deficit. I've presented this budget many times in August, and there's a deficit. Well, but we just don't have any more, shells to overturn or not many coins on them and many cushions, as Mike said, But we do have ideas, and through the committees, we've had some suggestions, and none of them are attractive, but some are less painful than others. And we're gonna spend the next several weeks kind of looking at those. But to that end, if you've got ideas, we'd love to hear them.
Well, also just to add on to that, the ARPA, we do have positions funded right now through ARPA. And in this, I said that I didn't carry any of those costs forward. As I said, some of them I think are providing services that I guess the board is going to have to make a decision if they want that to continue. But for this, any ARPA positions are not included after 26.
Mr. Kunkel?
Yeah, I don't know this appropriate time, but obviously we need growth. We're still dealing with the same people and our expenses are going higher and higher, especially in industry. I know we're discussing continue with the coordinator. I don't know if there's pressure can be put there. But another thing, looking at taxation wise, we are eating up farm ground, ag ground like crazy, but we don't change that zoning of those and make those commercial solar farms. Has anybody done the math on what the commercial tax rate would be on those properties that we're putting out in commercial? That seems to me more viable and more equitable towards all the people, property owners who are paying taxes.
I guess you'd have to ask Alex that question, because that would be his, because you're talking about the assessment of those properties, right?
Sorry, yes, correct, because they're still essentially an ag property and being taxed as an ag property, and we've turned them, as you can see on Highway 14, that's commercial. Hell, that's industrial. That ain't even commercial. It's industrial property is what we've turned them into. And I'm also looking farther into the future of this thing. We're also talking about when these things fail, and they will, and I don't want to deal with science, and when that ground is corrupted, and those companies are long gone, and that little tiny bond, because of the escalation of cost, won't even dismantle these things. Now the county's on the hook with all this property that's degenerate. To me, we got to start looking at it right now, especially looking at the next few years. I mean, realistically, to keep going viable and as great as we've been doing, we got to find a way to cut almost $5 million this year, because that $3 million, as Carrie's telling us, has let out some hypotheticals of people that she hasn't even put on the rolls here. This number, guys, is actually bigger than that number we're looking at here.
Ms. Von Bergen?
As you know, I'm not a solar fan on agriculture ground, but I guess for a little bit of clarification, the assessment of the land does stay as an agriculture use, but there are some pretty substantial improvement assessments that are added on those parcels with solar. Alex, of course, could give you specific numbers, but we do get quite a bit of money from those solar farms.
Okay, seeing no further questions, thank you.
I got one more.
Go right ahead. Here.
That's one way to cut me off, just turn off the mic. So the only other caveat that I'm going to throw in all this is our state and federal governments, because state and federal governments can very quickly modify these budgets, typically for the negative. I haven't really seen them say, hey, we're going to give you a bunch more money on a long-term basis. So we are constantly looking at what's going on in Springfield and Washington and how that's going to be impacting our budget. But my little crystal ball tells me that somehow, some way, state or federal government will modify our budget for us in a negative fashion over the next several years. So that's something we'll also have to be dealing with. So on that crystal note, thank you. Thank you to staff. They did a great job putting this together.
Thank you. Okay, with that, we'll move on to new business. Do any members have items from next Tuesday's agenda they'd like to remove for discussion? Ms. Von Bergen?
14A, I will need to abstain
You
from
want to
that.
abstain from that one?
Yes,
Okay.
please, thank you.
We will note that with the clerk. Seeing Mr. Smith?
In the zoning petitions, 10B. 10B1, I guess.
Okay. Any others? Seeing none, Mr. Smith, 10B1.
Okay, thank you. This went to the zoning board and it was voted 6-0 to recommend for denial. If you read the zoning board minutes, you'll see why. There's several environmental issues, drainage issues, non-compatible to surrounding use. So 6-0 for denial from the ZBA, but as always, it'll come to us as a written in the positive. So if you want to agree with what the ZBA is recommending, then we would be voting no on Tuesday night. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. No other items? Pete, you got a report for us today?
Yeah, 2 items related to county board. We're talking about September already, and the county board, we're going to invite you all in a little bit early on September 11th at the committee of the whole for kind of a refresher zoning 101. We did this earlier in the year at PED committee targeting our newer county board members, but I think Chairman Bueller would love to see all of us kind of get a refresher on the zoning 101 just from a process standpoint, from a decision-making standpoint. So we're going to have a quick meeting, 8:15 to 8:50, thereabouts, 8:55 on September 11th, and we'll get more word out for you on that. The second update related to your activities, and I get my notes here. The Farm Bureau would love, again, to welcome the county board to a farm tour, and that will be, we're targeting September 18th. Going to start at 4:30 at the Fritz Beef Farm up towards Harvard, and then at 5:30 we're going to see the Pisawa Gardens with a meal there. So again, more information to come from that, but 2 opportunities to get together. So September 11th here in front of the cow meeting, and then a farm tour the next week. We'll get more information out. Thank you.
Mr. Kunkel?
I'm sorry, was that 8:50, 5:0?
8:15.
15.
Yeah.
Thank you.
We'll use that 45 minutes before your September cow meeting to do a little education.
Okay, Pete, that's all you got?
That's all I got.
All right, we do have need for executive session today pursuant to 5 ILCS 120/2-1 regarding personnel. I have asked the state's attorney and HR to be with us here today. Mr. Gottermaller makes the motion for executive session. Mr. Kern seconds. Kathy, could you call the roll, please?
Pamela Altoff. Carolyn Campbell. John Collins. Joseph Gottemoller. Terry Greeno. Eric Hendricks. Carl Kaminsky. James Kearns. Dina Krager. Matthew Kunkel. Brian Sager. Michael Shorten.
Yes.
Michael Scala. Larry Smith. Patrick Sullivan. Paul Thomas. Gloria Van Hoff. Tracy Von Bergen. Chairman Bueller.
Yes. Mr. Kaminsky seconds. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Against? Motion carries. Mr. Scala makes the motion to adjourn, seconded by Ms. Altoff. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Have a great day.